Hello aspirants, very warm welcome to Oliveboard. This is Rohan Dange, your faculty for today. And in this session, we are going to talk about ESI, that is economic and social issues. Now you must be very well aware that since we are covering economic and social issues, we are focusing on concepts because these concepts are highly important and critical, not only from understanding the subject point of view, but also from garnering marks point of view. Okay. So in today's lecture, I will be talking about how to measure economic growth. Okay. So let's take a look at this. Yep. So, in the previous lectures, we have spoken about the difference between growth and development. When you talk about growth, growth is a what you can say a intangible metric, or rather a tangible metric, and development is an intangible metric. Growth can be measured, growth can be quantified, whereas development has to be seen, has to be observed. Okay, so there is a C change or a C difference between the two things, growth and development. Growth leads to development, but growth does not necessarily lead to development. Okay, so it is a one-way relationship. Whereas if you have development, that means it has been necessarily preceded by growth. Okay, now when you talk about the concept of economic growth, it refers to the increase in value of goods and services produced in the economy. That is the concept of economic growth, right? So I'm sure that you are very well aware with this. And it means that the annual growth in the country's GDP or GNP. What is a GDP? GDP is gross domestic product, right? And what is GNP? GNP is gross national product. Okay. So it means a considerable rise in per capita national product also. GDP बढ़ेगा तो आपका per capita GDP बढ़ेगा, GNP बढ़ेगा तो per capita GNP भी बढ़ेगा, right? So one can say that economic growth is a quantitative term which involves an increase in output. Output कौन सा? Goods and services. That is considered to be a part of your output. Okay. Now moving on. When you speak of economic development, it refers to the increase in living standards, right? When you speak of a city, like for example, I'll just give you an example within India. You see, you have a city which maybe goes by the name, say suppose let's take an example of Indore, and then you compare and contrast that with Mumbai. So between Indore and Mumbai, which city is more developed? Of course it is Mumbai. Why? It's because Mumbai offers more alternatives for public transport. Mumbai offers more job opportunities. Mumbai offers better houses with better facilities. Mumbai offers a lot of good opportunities for education. Mumbai offers you a higher level of education, right? Higher education meaning. So that does not mean that these are not the things available in Indore, but the quality and the quantity and to the extent to which they are available is less. So between Mumbai and Indore, Mumbai is certainly a much better and a far developed city, right? Now, of course, there are personal preferences, and I don't want to get into those. But when you measure standard of living, you generally measure these things. Okay. Development also means improvement in self-esteem needs. Very important. Why? Is because you take a look at European countries. In European countries, most of the countries you will see, or most of the countries and most of the people in those countries, if you see, they are happy and they have a higher level of self-esteem, right? And because of these things, rather I would say that these things are possible because of a higher level of development in those areas, right, which has been preceded by growth. You talk about countries like Finland, Sweden, Denmark, right? These are the countries which will actually be at a very high rank when you talk about development, right? And freedom from self operation. Now see, if you want to free yourself from operation today, the best form of government that any country can adopt is democracy. And if you take a look at the North American countries and European countries, 95 to 99% of those countries have a democratic form of government, correct? So what does that tell you? That tells you that these countries are far from self operation, human rights are secure over here, and what you can say, unwarranted or what you can say, unreasonable deportation, unwarranted or unreasonable jailing of people doesn't happen over there. And you can freely actually criticize the government, In fact, the politicians take ownership, full ownership of their own actions, and even resign at the slightest irregularity or at the slightest hint of inefficiency or corruption. Right, which is not the case in a country like ours. We have a democratic form of government, but can we boast of this? Can we say that our politicians are accountable? Can we say that good governance is a hallmark feature of India? Can we say that people are not put behind bars for criticizing the government in our country? Can we say that? Of course we cannot, right? So that quite naturally means that India or many other countries, I mean, if you take a look at countries from the Gulf, or countries from majorly the Islamic world, or even China, there the situation is very very bad. It's worse than India. We are still a democratic country, but if you take a look at countries like Pakistan, or if you talk about a country like Afghanistan, women absolutely do not have any civil rights over there. So what you experience in these countries is self oppression. Now let's talk about a country like Saudi Arabia. When you talk about a country like Saudi Arabia, they have such wealth, and they are so well to do. They are actually a booming economy because their economy is an oil economy. Yet what do you see in those countries or in those economies is that the general level of life for children and women is, and girl child, is very bad, is despicable, is in a shambolic state. So this also means that mere growth does not mean that it will lead to development. Numbers do not reflect the actual reality on ground. That is the real difference between economic growth and economic development. So in the exam, from an examination perspective, you should make a list of these things. These are your pointers. What are the differences between economic growth and economic development? So it's a narrow concept. Economic growth is a narrow concept, whereas economic development is a broader concept. Economic growth is in, basically it's increase in national income. Economic development is increase in real national income. Real national income meaning, नेशनल इनकम तो हम एग्रीगेट के तरीके पे लेते हैं, राइट? मगर रियल नेशनल इनकम का मतलब है कि पर कैपिटा इनकम भी तो बढ़ना चाहिए, राइट? हमारे यहाँ क्या हो रहा है कि वेल्थ कॉन्सेंट्रेशन एंड इनकम कॉन्सेंट्रेशन हो रहा है. There are about 1% people in this country who own more than 60% of the wealth. We don't want that kind of income augmentation. What we want is an aggregate increase in the average levels of per capita GDP in our country. Economic growth is something which is which interests actually what you can say the developed nations. But when you talk about the developing nations, development is more important, because as I said, growth is not enough. With growth, growth should lead to also your development, right? So for developing countries, economic development is more important than growth, right? For developed nations, economic growth, or rather economic growth in many other nations, is an automatic process, right? Magar development is a planned and a systematically or a meticulously calculated process. It has to be carried out, it has to be executed. ग्रोथ तो होता ही रहेगा. आपके देश की पॉपुलेशन बढ़ेगी तो कंजम्पशन बढ़ेगा, कंजम्पशन बढ़ेगा तो गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज का जो आदान प्रदान है वो भी बढ़ेगा, तो ग्रोथ तो होना ही है. मगर हम जब डेवलपमेंट की बात करते हैं तो दैट हैज टू बी कैटलाइज्ड बाय एन एजेंसी, एंड दैट एजेंसी इन दिस केस इज द गवर्नमेंट, right? So development growth occurs in a dynamic economy, right? An economy which has a fledgling primary, secondary, and a tertiary sector, whereas development occurs in a ecosystem where structural and technological changes take place, right? So when you talk about economic development, what do you understand by structural and technological changes? You say that there is a robust cyber security architecture, that there is a penetration of what you can say information and technology. There is a higher penetration of insurance products. There is a higher penetration and density of banking sector. So structurally speaking, when these changes take place, you can say that growth has led to development, that transition has occurred, right? Now, when you talk about economic development, or when you talk about economic growth, it occurs within a particular time period, right? हम हमेशा month to month या year on year calculation लेते हैं. That last year Indian economy shrank by -10%, right? In 2008 and 2009, Indian economy was growing by 10% or 9%. So you are taking a annual what you can say, you are taking annual figures into consideration, right? So basically you are looking at a particular time period. When you talk about economic development, it occurs in a long run. आप इंडिया की ही बात कर लो. We got independent in 1947 and our economy was liberalized in the year 1991. Since 1991, 30 years have elapsed, and in these 30 years our country has seen a paradigmatic shift, right? There have been tectonic changes, right? Before 1991, India was a public sector dominated country. Before 1991, the majority of what you can say, majority of the people were working in the public sector undertakings. After 1991, we saw an influx of IT sector, IT revolution. We saw that private sector enterprises started growing, and the middle class started getting jobs with the private sector enterprises, to the extent that today we are also known as the startup capital of the world, right? So this is a very significant change, but that has not occurred in one shot. It has taken a long time to happen. Okay. So when you talk about economic growth, you're talking about qualitative changes in the economy, or rather quantitative changes in the economy, right? Quantity, number, right? When you talk about economic development, you're looking at both quantitative and qualitative change in the economy. Okay. So economic growth is simply the growth in the income of a country, whereas economic development is growth in the quality of life of people of that country, right? Now how do you measure it? You measure it by using some certain macroeconomic indicators like GDP. GDP is per capita, GDP is gross domestic product, and you talk about per capita income as well. When you talk about economic development, it is measured using happiness index on various parameters. Okay, there are various other indexes also. Happiness index is just one of the parameters, because at the end of the day, all economic growth and development is geared towards the achievement of happiness. It is geared towards making sure that a peaceful life is available to everyone. Correct. So this is the basic difference between growth and development, or economic growth and economic development. Now why have I gone in so much of detail while explaining this concept is very simple, is because I want you to have these pointers while you are writing your essays or while you are writing your answers, because now RBI Grade B exam has moved towards more and more what you can say, descriptive pattern. Okay, so quite naturally I want you to have these pointers. So I hope that you have taken a note of this in your copy. Now when you talk about measurement of growth, there are actually four parameters on which you can measure your growth. It is GDP, GNP, NDP, NNP. GDP stands for gross domestic product, GNP stands for gross national product, NDP stands for net domestic product, and NNP stands for net national product. So these are all these indicators can be used to express national income, right? Although very what you can say, very frequently we use GDP as an indicator of our economic growth or national income, but it can be expressed in these three other forms as well. हालांकि GDP is the most preferred form of expression when it comes to national income. ठीक है, तो इतना ध्यान में रखना है आपको. So what is GDP? GDP represents the total monetary value of all final goods and services produced within a country during a period of time, typically 1 year. यहाँ पे सबसे important चीज है within a country, right? That means it is a territorial concept. It can also be considered to be a geographical concept, right? कि एक पर्टिकुलर टेरिटरी में, जैसे इंडिया की टेरिटरी है, हमारी बाउंड्रीज है, उसके अंदर जितना भी एडिशन हो रहा है फाइनल गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज में, उसे हम जीडीपी कहेंगे. सो इट इज द सम टोटल ऑफ द वैल्यू एडेड बाय ऑल प्रोड्यूसिंग यूनिट्स इन द डोमेस्टिक टेरिटरी एंड इंक्लूड्स द वैल्यू एडेड बाय करंट प्रोडक्शन बाय फॉरेन रेसिडेंट्स आल्सो. इंडिया में देयर आर वेरियस मल्टीनेशनल कंपनीज आल्सो. Quite naturally, we have the Googles and the Microsofts and the Amazons and the Ciscos. So these are the companies which are also adding a lot of value. We have Honda Motors, we have Toyota Motors, we have Pepsi, Coke, GlaxoSmithKline, Johnson and Johnson, Hindustan Unilever. When you talk about all these things, what do you understand? You understand that whether, regardless of the fact whether they are domestically owned or whether they are owned by entities across the world, their value addition will always be considered in the total value added while computation of GDP, right? So it is basically कि टेरिटरी के अंदर हो रहा है कि नहीं हो रहा है. अगर इंडिया के टेरिटरी के अंदर हो रहा है तो of course it will be added, right? So GDP, as I've told you, is the most commonly used measure of economic activity, and the term gross implies that GDP is measured gross of depreciation. अब आप सोच रहे होगे कि depreciation है क्या, right? So देखिए, पहले मैं डोमेस्टिक और प्रोडक्ट की बात कर लेता हूँ, डेप्रिसिएशन पे हम बाद में आएंगे। डोमेस्टिक की जब हम बात कर रहे हैं तो वी आर सिंपली रेफरिंग टू, basically we are utilizing the criteria of geography. Goods and services which are counted, which are those goods and services are counted which are produced within the country's border regardless of the nationality of the producer, right? प्रोडक्ट का क्या मतलब है? प्रोडक्ट मीन्स प्रोडक्शन, ठीक है। अब ग्रॉस का मतलब है, ग्रॉस इज बेसिकली when you are deducting, when depreciation is not deducted from the total value. Now let me tell you in a very very simple term. I have a car, and I have a Honda City car, right? The value, the cost of that car is, I actually bought it for 10 lakh rupees, correct? Now after 2 years, now in this year I bought the car 2 years ago. Now I want to sell off my car because I want to buy a better car or a higher version of it. Obviously I'm going to sell it in the second hand market. Now in the second hand market, when I'm selling the car, will I sell it at 10 lakh rupees? No, of course not. I will sell it at probably 4 lakh rupees or 5 lakh rupees, right? So in the entry books, in the record books, what is being registered? That a Honda City car is being sold. But when that car is being sold, it is sold at a depreciated rate, right? So when I'm accounting for one more Honda City in the economy, which is being added in the economy, right? I'm not stating that it is sold at 10 lakh rupees. It is sold at only 4 lakh rupees. Why? Because there is a particular depreciation associated with that car, right? So economy में depreciation भी होता है। मैंने अगर एक घर खरीदा और मुझे घर बेचना है तो घर की वैल्यू बढ़ती है, मगर डिप्रिसिएशन होता है कि नहीं होता? द पेंट वॉल स्टार्ट कमिंग ऑफ, or rather the plumbing starts becoming problematic, or the furniture starts getting what you can say, starts getting damaged. So value of the house may increase, but there is the depreciation when you talk about the quality of the house, or when you talk about the ingredients that go into the making of a house. So हर चीज में डिप्रिसिएशन होता है। यू बाय, आई मीन आप रबर टायर खरीदो तो वो भी घिस जाते हैं कुछ दिनों बाद, उसमें भी डिप्रिसिएशन आता है। सो कोई भी चीज में डिप्रिसिएशन आना ही आना है। सेकेंड हैंड फोन हो या सेकेंड हैंड लैपटॉप हो, डिप्रिसिएशन आता है। और इसी डिप्रिसिएशन को, मगर हम जब ग्रॉस डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्ट कैलकुलेट करते हैं तो हम इस डिप्रिसिएशन को अकाउंट नहीं कर रहे, राइट? हम उस डिप्रिसिएशन इज नॉट बीइंग डिडक्टेड फ्रॉम द टोटल वैल्यू। ओके, दैट मीन्स GDP as a measure of economic growth does not take into account the element of depreciation. इतना आपको याद रखना, ठीक है? और यही डिफरेंशिएशन है GDP और GNP में, ग्रॉस डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्ट एंड ग्रॉस नेशनल प्रोडक्ट में यही डिफरेंस है, राइट? और रादर ग्रॉस डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्ट एंड नेट डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्ट में ये डिफरेंस है, दैट ग्रॉस डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्ट takes depreciation into the picture. Net domestic product actually deducts depreciation. So it gives you a more accurate picture of your economy, right? So what is included in GDP? Final goods and services sold for money, right? This is one thing which is included. Then if I take a look at the next point, it is only sales of final goods are counted, because the transaction concerning a good used to make the final good is already incorporated in the final total value. एक पेन अगर आप खरीद रहे हो तो पेन की वैल्यू 10 रुपया है, तो इट विल बी काउंटेड। अब रिफिल किसी और ने बनाई, कैप किसी और ने बनाई, बॉडी किसी और ने बनाई, और उन्होंने जो फाइनल प्रोड्यूसर को बेची, दैट विल नॉट बी कैलकुलेटेड, बिकॉज पेन के जो फाइनल प्राइसेस में ऑल दीज प्राइसेस आर अकाउंटेड फॉर, राइट? So also intermediate goods used to produce other goods rather than being sold to final purchasers are not counted. जैसे कार बन रही है, कार में इंटरमीडिएट गुड्स कौन से होंगे? लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल लेदर अपहोल्स्ट्री, तो लेदर इज एन इंटरमीडिएट गुड, राइट? तो दैट विल नॉट बी काउंटेड। रबर टायर, दैट विल नॉट बी काउंटेड, बिकॉज उसके फाइनल काउंटिंग में तो आ ही रहा है वो। तो डबल काउंटिंग ना हो इसलिए इंटरमीडिएट गुड्स को हम कैलकुलेट नहीं करते। एक घर की वैल्यू अगर हमने कैलकुलेट की है, राइट, अ हाउस, so a house may say, suppose a house is costing you about 1.5 crore rupees. Now are you going to also calculate the value of the cement which was used to make the house? No, बिकॉज सीमेंट इज एन इंटरमीडिएट गुड. जो हाउस की टोटल वैल्यू इसमें ऑलरेडी उसे इंक्लूड किया गया है. अगर आप सीमेंट को भी इंक्लूड कर लोगे तो दैट विल लीड टू डबल काउंटिंग. करेक्ट. एंड देन अननेसेसरीली योर जीडीपी वुड लुक inflated, right? And you don't want that to happen. Like for example, on your screens you can see I have given an example that the value of flour used in making bread would not be counted, because that is already that will be counted when the final value of bread will be taken. So here flour is an intermediate good when you talk about the bread making process, right? So these are all things, this is how things are included in the GDP. Now which things are not included in GDP? Unpaid work, राइट. हमारे भारत देश में आज भी श्रमदान होता है, अनपेड वर्क है वो, राइट. फॉर एग्जाम्पल लेट्स टेक अ लुक एट द हाउस वाइफ्स. द वर्क परफॉर्म बाय हाउस वाइफ्स is very grueling, is very taxing, but are these housewives paid? No, they are not paid. Actually, if you start paying them for the work that they do, the payment would, according to a study, the payment would amount to lakhs. It is possible that they might earn more than the people working in regular jobs. It is possible, but that's unpaid work. So the work performed within family or volunteer work or NGO work or Shramadan, these are the things which are generally not included in the computation of GDP. Okay. Then there are non-monetary compensated work also. Like for example, we sometimes don't pay in cash, we pay in kind, right? If somebody is working in a wedding, we generally see in India that people are given gifts, right? In So that kind of compensation is not going to be accounted while the computation of GDP. Let's understand that very clearly. Only monetary compensation is going to be included in GDP. Non monetary compensation is not going to be included. इसका ये मतलब हुआ कि barter trade जब होगा, which is the fourth point, barter trade में आप compensation एक गुड के या सर्विस के तौर पे दे रहे हो, that will not be included in GDP. आज भी आप गांव में जाओगे तो कई बार ऐसा होता है that for 1 kg of rice 1 liter of milk is exchanged. आज भी ऐसा होता है, right? Although it is very rare, but in the remote villages of the country it still happens. So that's barter trade. That's non-monetary compensation for work or non-monetary what you can say reward. So that will not be included in the computation of GDP. Let's be very clear on that. Okay. Then black market, of course black market इंडियन इकोनॉमी के साथ एक पैरेलल इकोनॉमी जिसको हम ब्लैक इकोनॉमी कहते हैं. इंडिया की ब्लैक इकोनॉमी भी इंडियन इकोनॉमी के रेगुलर साइज जितनी ही बड़ी, इतना बड़ा हमारा ब्लैक मार्केट है, राइट. जहां पे रिसीट नहीं मिलती हमें पेमेंट की. सो इस ब्लैक मार्केट में भी जो भी ट्रांजेक्शन होंगे दैट इज नॉट इंक्लूडेड इन द कंप्यूटेशन ऑफ जीडीपी. वेरी वेरी क्लियर. ओके. देन इलीगल एक्टिविटीज, राइट. हो सकता है कि कहीं पे आप यू आर पेइंग अ ब्राइब टू गेट वर्क डन. एक छोटी सी लाइसेंस की बात क्यों ना हो, यू आर पेइंग सम ब्राइब. Of course that is compensation for somebody else, or that is income for somebody else, but still that won't be included in the computation of GDP. Transfer payments, what are transfer payments? जो गवर्नमेंट ट्रांसफर करती है, जैसे पेंशन, राइट. पेंशन इज नॉट गोइंग टू बी इंक्लूडेड इन जीडीपी, राइट. जैसे गवर्नमेंट आपको, जैसे फार्मर्स को डायरेक्ट बेनिफिट ट्रांसफर देती है फर्टिलाइजर खरीदने के लिए, दैट विल नॉट बी इंक्लूडेड इन जीडीपी. जैसे गवर्नमेंट सब्सिडी देती है इलेक्ट्रिसिटी पे, दैट ऑल्सो विल नॉट बी इंक्लूडेड इन जीडीपी. सो ये ट्रांसफर पेमेंट्स कहा जाता है. पेंशन हो गया, सब्सिडी हो गया, these are all transfer payments, they will not be included in GDP. I'm sending some money to my mother, that is also transfer payment, that will not be included in GDP. Okay, right. And obviously some intermediate goods and services which are used to produce other final goods and services, that will also not be included in your GDP. Okay, so that's quite natural, that's quite normal. Now हम हमेशा जब कैलकुलेट करते हैं जीडीपी को तो वी टेक अ बेस ईयर. So the base year initially or before this was 2004 and 5. Now the base year has been changed to 2011 and 12. So the GDP that we are calculating today is actually in comparison. The growth that we see is always expressed in comparison to the base year which was 2011 and 12. Right. So at regular intervals हमें अपना base year बदलना पड़ता है. एट रेगुलर इंटरवल्स हमें अपना बेस ईयर क्यों बदलना पड़ता है? जैसे आज 2021 में अगर मैं अपनी इकोनॉमी का साइज देखूं और इस इकोनॉमी को बेस ईयर के साथ कंपेयर करूं, और चलो हम अज्यूम करते कि वो बेस ईयर 2004 और 5 है, तो I am going back, I'm actually measuring and comparing the size of my economy to the size of the economy which was 15 or 16 years ago. So in that comparison, to my economy will look very very big, right? It will look inflated because 2004 and 5 mein, if you remember, the prices of petrol were very low, right? 2004 and 5 mein petrol was hardly 45 to 50 rupees. Today it is what, it has crossed 100 mark, right? So likewise, the cost of everything has either doubled or tripled now after 15 years. So today, if I just take a look at the size of my economy, and if I compare it to 2004 and 5, quite naturally, unnecessarily, my economy would look inflated and big. And I would feel that my economy has already grown. But has the economy really grown? It may have grown, but not to the extent that you are looking at it. राइट, जो 100 रुपए की चीज मिल रही थी वो आज 200 रुपए में मिल रही, तो आप ये कहोगे कि ये 200 रुपए इनकम हो गई अभी बेचने वाले की? नहीं, 100% से नहीं बढ़ी है उसकी इनकम, बिकॉज इन्फ्लेशन का भी तो हाथ रहा होगा। हो सकता है कि 100 रुपए में जो बढ़ा है उसमें से 50 से 60 रुपए तो इन्फ्लेशन की वजह से बढ़ा है। तो रियल ग्रोथ कितना हुआ? रियल ग्रोथ तो सिर्फ 40 रुपए हुआ ना, बिकॉज 60 रुपए जो ऐड हुआ है वो तो इन्फ्लेशन की वजह से ऐड हुआ है। सो इसीलिए हमें at regular intervals we have to keep on shifting our goal post. That means we have to keep on revising our base year. अभी देखिए कि हम 2021 में हैं, अब प्रपोजल आ चुका है दैट 2000 एनके सिंह कमिटी के जो रिकमेंडेशंस है, एनके सिंह कमिटी विच इज, एनके सिंह वाज बेसिकली द चेयरमैन ऑफ द 15th फाइनेंस कमीशन, ही इज स्टेटिंग वेरी क्लियरली दैट 2017 इज गोइंग टू बी द न्यू बेस ईयर। सो बस ये 6 महीने 1 साल की बात है, विद इन दैट ये जो बेस ईयर है 2011-12 का, ये भी चेंज होकर 2017 होने वाला है। सो आप समझ सकते हो कि विद इन अ स्पैन ऑफ 6 to 8 ईयर्स ये बेस ईयर हमेशा रिवाइज होते रहेगा, करेक्ट, राइट? सो बेस ईयर इज ऑलवेज रिवाइज इन कैलकुलेशन ऑफ जीडीपी। नाउ एक चीज है कि ग्रॉस वैल्यू एडेड, कई बार आप एडिटोरियल्स पढ़ते हो तो उसमें ग्रॉस वैल्यू एडेड ये भी चीज आपको शायद देखने में मिलती होगी। सो व्हाट इज ग्रॉस वैल्यू एडेड? सी जीडीपी हमें पता है, जीडीपी इज द मॉनेटरी वैल्यू of all final economic goods and services produced in a country during a specific period of time. And domestic territory means political frontiers of the country, including its territorial waters. What are territorial waters? Territorial waters are basically 12 nautical miles from your seashore, right? Those are your territorial waters. Commercial vessels are operated by countries' residents. They also ply in those territorial waters, right? That also includes countries' embassies and consulates located abroad. Like for example, there is a embassy of India in London, that's in UK, right? So of course that is also included. Now what is GVA? GVA is a measure of value added in goods and services produced in the economy. So GVA is equal to economic output minus economic input, right? मतलब आउटपुट जो है उसमें से आप इनपुट को घटा लो तो वो आपका ग्रॉस वैल्यू एडेड है। अब इसका क्या मतलब हुआ? सिंपल सी चीज है, यू आर मेकिंग, say suppose you are producing mango juice. So for producing mango juice or for processing that, what do you require? You require mango, first of all. You require a sweetener, right? You require other preservatives. And what do you require? You require cans, or you require cardboard paper for making those cans, right? So ये this is, इसकी भी कॉस्ट होगी ना, हो सकता है कि इसकी कॉस्ट 100 रुपया हो। सो दैट इज योर इनपुट। इकोनॉमिक आउटपुट मतलब आप उस कैन को 200 रुपये में बेच रहे हो, ठीक है? सो इकोनॉमिक आउटपुट कितना हुआ? 200 रुपीज। इनपुट कितना था? 100 रुपीज। सो ग्रॉस वैल्यू एडेड कितना हुआ? 100 रुपीज। 200 माइनस 100 इज इक्वल टू 100। सो जीवीए इज वैल्यू एडेड, एज द नेम सजेस्ट, आपने वैल्यू कितना ऐड किया है। एंड जीवीए, लेट मी टेल यू, इज ऑल्सो सेक्टर स्पेसिफिक, राइट? दैट मीन्स फॉर एग्रीकल्चरल सेक्टर जीवीए विल बी समथिंग, फॉर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चरल सेक्टर जीवीए विल बी स्पेसिफिक, फॉर सर्विसेज सेक्टर ऑल्सो जीवीए विल बी कैलकुलेटेड सेपरेटली। सो इस तरह आपका जीवीए कैलकुलेट होगा। एंड इन तीनों को जब समेशन करोगे आप, राइट, दैट आफ्टर दैट समेशन and after adding taxes and reducing subsidies from that, what you will get is GDP, right? So GDP is equal to GVA of primary sector, GVA of industrial sector, and GVA of services sector plus taxes minus subsidies. Okay, so I hope I have made myself absolutely clear now. So the Central Statistical Office, or rather the National Statistical Office, now why am I saying National Statistical Office is because इसका नाम बदल गया है। ओके, सो अपडेटेड इंफॉर्मेशन मैं आपको दे रहा हूँ, सीएसओ नहीं है, एनएसओ है, नेशनल स्टैटिस्टिकल ऑफिस इन द मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ स्टैटिस्टिक्स एंड प्रोग्राम इम्प्लीमेंटेशन is responsible for the compilation of national account statistics including GDP. सो एग्जाम में अगर आपसे पूछा जाता है कि which organization or which department is charged with the responsibility of computing or compilation of GDP, then that would be NSO, that is National Statistics Office. And under which ministry does it come? It comes under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Right. So CSO became NSO in 2019 when it was merged with NSSO. NSSO stands for National Sample Survey Organization. So National Sample Survey Organization and Central Statistics Office were both merged in 2019, resultantly giving us an umbrella organization called as NSO, that is National Statistics Office. Okay. So this is the primary difference between gross domestic product and gross value added. So I hope you've made a note of this, correct? Now let's understand what is gross national product. Now, when you talk about gross national product, it is not a territorial concept like GDP. It is not a national, what you can say, it is not a geographical concept like GDP. It is a concept wherein the productivity of all the Indians is taken into consideration. Right? कि Indians कितना ऐड कर रहे हैं, हाउ मच आर इंडियंस प्रोड्यूसिंग. अब जाहिर सी बात है कि इंडियंस डोंट जस्ट रिसाइड इन इंडिया, इंडियंस रिसाइड आउटसाइड ऑफ इंडिया ऑल्सो. देर आर इंडियंस हु आर रिसाइडिंग इन ऑस्ट्रेलिया, नॉर्थ अमेरिका, यूरोप, लैटिन अमेरिका, अदर कंट्रीज इन एशिया, गल्फ, राइट, यूरेशिया. सो ऐसी कोई जगह नहीं है विच हैज नॉट बीन पॉपुलेटेड बाय द इंडियंस. I can tell you that if there is a cricket match at the North Pole or the South Pole, only penguins and Indians will show up. Right? Why? Because Indians are everywhere, practically everywhere. And we see that Indians are everywhere because they have gone out for in search of greener pastures. That means they have gone out in search of better livelihood opportunities. Right? So when you talk about gross national product, you will take into account all the what you can say the productivity of all the Indians across the globe. So this is how the concept of gross national product is naturally different from the concept of gross domestic product, right? So if you have to understand the relationship between GDP and GNP, this is how you understand. GNP is equal to GDP plus net factor income from abroad. नेट फैक्टर इनकम फ्रॉम अब्रॉड का मतलब ये एक्सपोर्ट्स माइनस इंपोर्ट्स, राइट? सो इनकम फ्रॉम अब्रॉड में आप किस किस चीज को देखोगे? प्राइवेट रेमिटेंसेस. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, व्हाट आर प्राइवेट रेमिटेंसेस? देयर आर सो मेनी इंडियंस हु आर स्टेइंग इन से सपोज गल्फ. गल्फ जाते हैं, बहुत सारा काम करते हैं, डॉक्टर्स जाते हैं, इंजीनियर्स जाते हैं, इवन ट्रक ड्राइवर्स भी जाते हैं और घर पे पैसा भेजते हैं, राइट? सो द मनी दैट दे आर सेंडिंग इज कंसिडर्ड एज प्राइवेट रेमिटेंस, राइट? दे आर अर्निंग इन डॉलर्स, दिरहम्स, euro, and they are sending money back home. In fact, India has become the highest remittance receiving country in the world, right? In fact, so therefore we've received about $72 billion in the year 2019 or in the year 2020. So private remittances can be included in income from abroad. अब देखो, सिंपल सी बात है कि इंडिया में भी जो फॉरेनर्स रहते हैं वो भी तो पैसा अपने घर भेजते होंगे ना, राइट? तो सबसे पहली बात है कि इंडिया में फॉरेनर्स जितने काम करते हैं, that is very very less as compared to the Indians who are working abroad. So इसका नेट इनपुट इम्पैक्ट क्या आएगा? पॉजिटिव या नेगेटिव? पॉजिटिव ही आएगा, बिकॉज हमारे पैसा ज्यादा आ रहा है और हमारे से पैसा कम बाहर जा रहा है, राइट? इंटरेस्ट ऑन एक्सटर्नल लोन्स. अब नाउ इंडिया हैज टेकन अ लोन, राइट? So India has to pay a principal amount on that and India has to pay an interest amount on that, correct? At the same time, when you talk about loans, India has given out some loans also. जैसे नेपाल, भूटान, ऐसे कंट्रीज को तो इंडिया ने भी लोन दिया हुआ है, करेक्ट? सो व्हेन यू टॉक अबाउट देम, तो ये नेपाल और भूटान भी तो इंडिया को लोन वापस कर रहे हैं. अब आप नेट इंपैक्ट देखोगे तो पॉजिटिव है कि नेगेटिव? तो ये नेट इंपैक्ट जो है नेगेटिव है, क्योंकि इंडिया का जो लोन पेमेंट ऑब्लिगेशन है, इट इज मच हायर देन द लोन रिसीट्स, करेक्ट? क्योंकि हमने लोन लिया ज्यादा है देने से, ओके? So when it comes to interest on external loans, that figure is always going to be negative because we are paying more than receiving. As simple as that. So I hope I have made myself clear. Now external grants. Grant is also some money which is given to the country. But grants का क्या है कि grants पे you don't have to pay back the money. Therefore it is called as a grant. So when it comes to grants, India receives grants and India gives out the grants also. Right? So when you talk about grants, even that overall impact is going to be negative. Why? Because we give more grants to countries like Afghanistan, to countries like Nepal, Bhutan. Whereas when you talk about रिसीट ऑफ ग्रांट्स देन वो कम मिलता है पर कम मिलता है, तो ओवरऑल इम्पैक्ट क्या हुआ? नेगेटिव. सो इंटरेस्ट ऑन एक्सटर्नल लोन्स नेगेटिव है, एक्सटर्नल ग्रांट्स भी नेगेटिव टेरिटरी में आता है, सिर्फ प्राइवेट रेमिटेंसेस पॉजिटिव टेरिटरी में आएगा. तो नेट फैक्टर इनकम फ्रॉम अब्रॉड विच इज एक्सपोर्ट्स माइनस इंपोर्ट्स पॉजिटिव रहेगा कि नेगेटिव रहेगा? ऑफ कोर्स नेगेटिव रहेगा, राइट. सो फॉर इंडिया जीएनपी इज इक्वल टू जीडीपी माइनस इनकम फ्रॉम अब्रॉड, right? Whereas theoretically it is GNP is equal to GDP plus net factor income from abroad. Okay, so with this I end my lecture for the day. I hope you have understood the difference between GDP and GNP. I will see you in a while with a session on management. So till the time we meet next, this is Rohan Dange signing off from Oliveboard. Thank you, take care.